did you know that this individual at our competitor, he just started posting last month, and look, he's got 3 posts and they have hundreds of reactions, and he's visible. He's talking to our clients. Did you know that? You're not doing anything. Are you comfortable knowing that he's talking to some of our clients? That usually gets their attention, and then they go, ooh, okay, we need to get on board. We need to get on this train. We need to have these conversations with our clients, with our competitors' clients and prospects and whatnot.
Hi, I'm Andrew Seal, and I'd like to welcome you to my podcast, How to Run a Happy Employee Advocacy Pilot. This podcast explores the best way for organisations to launch and sustain successful employee advocacy programs. Now, building employee advocacy is often described as a complex and difficult task, and while there are many moving parts to coordinate, at its heart is a simple framework which puts employees at the centre. Now, this is what I define as happy employee advocacy, a program which delivers results for the business by focusing first on what's in it for their employees. I'm delighted to welcome today David Perry as my guest. Now, David's been working in employee advocacy for many years, running a number of programs. He's manager for employee advocacy and social media strategy at WSP in Canada. And he's an expert in empowering teams and individuals to maximize their online influence. And whether this is employee advocacy, employer branding, content marketing, or social selling, he's worked in all those areas. Now, David, I've been following your content for a few years now, and we first met on LinkedIn. And I have to say, you're probably one of the most thoughtful and insightful writers around employee advocacy that I know, really. I mean, you produce such amazing content, and it's always really valuable. Every time I read your stuff, I always learn something new. So welcome to the show, David. It's fantastic to have you here, and lovely to see you.
Thank you, Andrew. Very humbling, your words, your feedback. I'm glad that you enjoy the content that I put out there. I just want to make sure that correct a little something. I used to be a manager of employee advocacy and social media strategy at WSP Global. That came to an end at the end of 2023. So I'm currently looking for my next career opportunity, next challenge. So if there's any big brands out there in the B2B professional services or other industries that are looking for someone to run their employee advocacy program or part of their MarTech solutions, I'm interested. Let's talk. But that is not the topic of our discussion today. So thank you very much for inviting me, Andrew. Very happy to be here and to share what I've learned over the last 8 or 9 years of running programs, starting them off as pilots, and then growing the employee advocacy program.
Fantastic. Yes, very keen to hear all your insight and knowledge you can share, because there's so much we can learn. But the core of what I want to talk about today is how to respond to the common fears and resistance that appears around employee advocacy and perhaps the idea of starting a program. So with that in mind, I'd just like to kick off first with a quick definition, because not everyone's always 100% clear on what employee advocacy is, or not everyone agrees on the term. So could you help by just defining how you see what employee advocacy is?
So to me, employee advocacy is a structured program. It doesn't necessarily need a platform, but if you want to sort of have more control and have something that's a bit more structured and robust, a platform is definitely the way to go. But you can actually start with something quite smaller than that. But basically, it is an opportunity to train, coach employees on becoming active on social networks wherever their audience, their community is. Mostly in professional terms, LinkedIn would be sort of the default social network, but basically there could be other platforms. So it could be Twitter or TikTok or whatever the social network is. But basically, it is enabling them to be comfortable putting out content. Um, Mostly at the start, this content will be content that is of interest to them and to their audience. And then interspersed in between those sorts of industry news and those industry insights, there's branded content that gets squeezed in that they will reshare, and then that will give visibility to the company. The idea is to make them sort of brand ambassadors. The more reach they have, the more visibility they have, indirectly, the company will have also that added visibility.
No, I love that, and I love the fact you mentioned that it's about content that's ultimately primarily of interest to them, and it's around industry news and things like that, and then dispersing that with brand content, so they're building up that profile as you say, first. So for companies who are thinking about employee advocacy in their organisation, I mean, in my experience, if you're launching a program, perhaps if you're trying to pitch this into senior leadership or persuading other colleagues to join, sooner or later you're going to meet some resistance. Not all of it's going to be kind of explicit or obvious, but there's going to be some pushback somewhere. I mean, is this your experience? And if so, what do you think stops companies from launching employee advocacy programs?
I mean, definitely there will be, not necessarily, I mean, there might be pushback, but more often than not, it is a question of doing something that's different, doing something that's new, and doing something that management may not have necessarily heard of, seen. And so, you know, it's always been a question, and taking a step back, this is change management. We're doing something that's very different. We're asking people to change their habits, even if it's just a couple of minutes a week. It's something that isn't in sort of their habitual day to day. That's change management. So a lot of it will be, what is it, why would we be doing this? And then when you sort of explain what EA is, there's always that element of lost control that they feel, that management feels as though, oh my God, we're going to let our employees speak on behalf of us. And then you've got to correct them. No, they're not speaking on your behalf. They're speaking about their expertise, their knowledge, their experience, and you're shining through them more or less. And so it's all of that wrapped into one that sort of creates this hesitancy as to why should we move forward with an EA program? What's the cost? What's the benefit? What's the risk? And then they only see the risk. So you've got to sort of address all of those key elements. You're likely to have to do a lot of evangelizing, a lot of presentation, a lot of reassuring at various levels. And then I think the right way to approach it is to start small with a small group and then to go from there.
I think it's really interesting that you pulled out the word change management, because that kind of leads on to the next question I wanted to ask, really, was why is this different essentially from other forms of marketing, and particularly other forms of new marketing? I mean, you could maybe, if you said that influencer marketing was quite a new form of marketing, but why is employee advocacy particularly difficult? And I think perhaps you kind of hit the nail on the head there. We're saying it's essentially it's change management, isn't it? You're changing the organization as well as simply trying to roll out a new marketing approach.
Definitely, there's that aspect to it. Then again, you have to be, if you're, completely honest in your discussion with your senior management, you have to tell them that, listen, employees are already out there, they're already sharing content. This would formalize at least a group of those employees, and we would ensure that they know about the social media policy. And if there's not,
Mm.
well, we need to put one out there. We need to send out internal comms so that they're aware that there's a structure to what they can and cannot do, or best practices and how to better do it. So there's that aspect to it. There's the control, which is a big portion of it, which they see themselves as sort of losing, where we're going to let employees be active out there and push out content. Because even though influencer marketing might seem more at the forefront on the edge of what's being done, to someone in marketing, to a marketer, a traditional marketer, and I don't say digital marketer because any marketer today
Mm, yeah.
Digital is part of it. I mean, it's a nonsense to say. So any traditional marketer would see influencer marketing as something on which they have a bit more control than if we're going to let our thousands of employees produce content, their own content, reshare content, industry news, reshare some of ours. Will they position it in the right way? Will they push that in to sort of support the campaign that we're doing and all of that? So all these elements, there's a lot of unknowns, loss of control, and I think that is really what a program manager needs to always have at the back of their mind to remind and reassure along the way. Unfortunately, EA isn't something which you set it and you forget it, and it's going to simmer and grow and it's going to do its thing. You have to constantly make sure that it's doing well, that good content is being added to it, that users are active, the ones that are not. It's a constant, and that is part of it. The other part is to make sure that those who have sponsored it, who are budgeting for it, understand the value behind what you're doing and what you're trying to do and what you're achieving.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I really like that perspective. And do you think that that's what stops perhaps some businesses, some perhaps larger businesses, from even trying it at all? This loss of control, or potential loss of control, the kind of fears around this, where instead they rely on perhaps more seemingly predictable forms of marketing, such as paid media, for example, where even if the ROI perhaps is less or is declining, as many suggest it is these days, they prefer to go down that route because it's predictable. They know if they spend X, they get Y, whereas employee
Yeah,
advocacy.
it's better the devil you know than the devil you don't type of thing. Absolutely. I mentioned earlier that mm, if it's something that's unknown to them, if it's not something that they're very familiar with, added to that there's a loss of control. In often cases, it'll be easier, more justifiable to say, I've invested X number of, dollars or pounds into something that's sort of, proven that we've done in the past and we've got some results rather than investing that into mm, a platform. But the actual biggest investment, I think, is in the people. It's the time that you're going to take internally, that members will take internally to train, to coach, to manage the platform, to add the content. All that time, adds up. And so they'd rather do something that they are familiar with than, again, change management, than something that's unknown. Now you can throw in there some KPIs and some ROIs, and here's what it's costing us in terms of the actual platform. Here's in terms of time, but then here's the reach that we're gaining, the clicks that we're getting, the visibility that our employees are getting, the traffic that the website is getting. To me, that's a half of it. The other half is some of the non-tangible. So it's the discussions that your employees are having, the extra discussions and conversations that are happening with clients, with prospects, with potential employees that are seeing what you're doing, what employees are working on, the types of projects that they're doing. So those, unfortunately, are very difficult to capture and to measure and add up. A lot of it is sort of will have to be done through surveys of the employees participating in the program. You've got to do those regularly and make sure that those are some of the highlights of your reporting. Here's traffic to the website. Here's the number of reach that we got, the number of clicks, number of reactions, and whatnot. Okay, you've got that in your presentation, but then there were this came in and this client and this discussion, this new hire or so and so was able to get was asked to speak at a conference or was interviewed by industry journalists and whatnot. Those, if you are able to capture them, are going to greatly help the ROI and proof of why and how successful your program is. Very important.
No, I absolutely agree 100%. So, in your experience, have you found that those less tangible, by collecting where you can, those less tangible measures that you just talked about,
Hmm.
it has that convinced skeptical leaders in your experience? Has that changed things if the ROI or the measures aren't so black and white, so to speak?
It might convince the senior management that is skeptical or not convinced of the value of EA, but I would say that it I would prefer to launch a program, launch a pilot with a senior manager that understands the value enough to defend the program. And then if you're able, on top of that, on a regular basis, on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, to come back with some good numbers where you're able to, you know, draw a dotted line to some traffic to the website and visibility and whatnot, and then add to that, those conversations that they've had with clients, those new projects that were the results of their extra posting because that spurred a conversation that was then taken offline and resulted in a new project because they weren't aware that we also had this service or had this solution or had this product amongst our offer. Or these new hires, we're in a difficult market as much as there's thousands of layoffs currently happening at this time of year. There's also, hundreds of thousands of positions that are still open, and it's hard for talent folks to find the right talent. Having those conversations through your employees is the best way of doing it. They're your best ambassadors. So if you're able to provide that sort of proof to those leaders, then that's going to reinforce the program and reinforce their belief in EA and increasing from the pilot to something a bit more substantial, a larger portion of their employees. But it's definitely, I mean, that's one of the key elements of success is having at least one senior leader that understands the importance, the value, is a believer. But I truly believe, and I know that having one isn't enough. Once you've got that one leader, go elsewhere. You've found somebody in a specific group, in a specific sector or vertical within your organization. Great, you can launch the pilot, but then start hunting, start looking for additional senior management that will buy into what you're doing because that initial leader might move on to a different role, might no longer be involved. And then you're sort of left with, okay, I'm running this EA program, but it doesn't have an owner, a true owner that understands the value that will, step up and defend it. That time of year where budgets are looked at and whatnot, you need to have those individuals and the senior management be able to do that. If the more of them you have, the more solid the foundation of your initiative of your program will be.
That feels like really good advice. Essentially, you're protecting the program, aren't you? Because as you say, there's always the chance that the leader you had originally moves on in some way. So yeah,
Yep.
so building that sort of future proofing and protecting it for the future makes absolute sense. The other thing I think that stood out from what you're saying is that, if I'm right, what you're saying in terms of reporting, it's less about, well, it is about numbers and so on, but it's as much about building the story, building a narrative around it, using these different elements that you're picking out, these non-tangible elements, to build that story of success and kind of employee engagement and customer engagement, depending it is, or talent engagement, depending what you're doing.
Absolutely. As much as the numbers are important, as much as measuring, those key elements of what does success look like? In the end, if you really think about it, in the end, the numbers don't mean anything if those non-tangibles aren't happening. I mean, those numbers are there to ensure that you're going to have those conversations with your clients, that you'll have new conversations with prospects, that you'll bring in new business, new talent, new projects. That's actually the end goal. So even though they're not they're not traceable back to your program, and the person who's using your EA program or it being simply active on their own because of the training, because of the support that you're providing, if even if you're not able to track it digitally, if you are able to do it from those surveys, from reaching out to the users for good stories, and you're reporting on those stories, and that's being published internally through a newsletter, through an intranet to say, so and so was able to, and this new client came in, and this was a result of a conversation that they had following their increased activity on LinkedIn, following their active posting on a regular basis. That should be definitely an element of your promotion of the program internally.
So that's so a big part of it. So it's not just about selling it into or pitching it to the senior leadership. It's about sharing that generally within the company, outside the people within the program itself. Which kind of leads me on to the next question, really, because we're talking about kind of fear, resistance, concerns around programs here. That's the topic today. So what about the employees, colleagues who we'd like to get involved? What are the issues you think are stopping more of them getting involved? Do you think something holds them back in some way? A sort of different side of this.
Yeah, they're so the employees, the actual users, are one of the three main stakeholders with when you're running an EA program. So you've got you've got the managers, the upper management that's paying for it, that's allocating a portion of their budget. You have those that will be managing the platform itself. It might be one individual to start with, but eventually as you're sort of growing this and you're making this a more robust program, if you're part of a large organization, you might have some people in other regions that are doing their thing in their language, pushing content into a different language than you as the platform manager, program manager understand. So you're going to have administrators or channel managers within the platform. So they're a stakeholder as well. If whatever you're doing is tedious and difficult and boring, and it's something that they hate doing, it's going to be difficult to get them to do the follow-ups with their users, the adding of the content and whatnot. So whatever your program, whatever your platform needs to be something that they understand. And last but not least, it's the actual employees. So they have to understand what's in it for them. And your whole social media and personal branding training should be at the fundamentally at the core should be about them and positioning them as visible experts, letting them understand that they're going to get opportunities out of this, that it's a way for them to give back if they've got years and years of experience, if they're leadership position, then it's the thought leadership, it's that visibility, it's helping out a younger version of them, of who they were, understand what it's like to work within the company, within the industry, etc. So it is core to them. One of the first thing that they'll tell you is, I don't have the time. I just, because they see this as, oh my God, this is something that I'm gonna have to do, you know, hours a week, and I just don't have the time to do that right now. And that objection is you need to sort of to break it down into baby steps. Start small. Start peeking into your LinkedIn feed on a daily basis for a few minutes a day. End it there. At one point, when you get into that habit, you'll want to react. Okay, do a couple of reactions every time you take your 5 minutes in the morning or in between breaks or at lunch, whatever. Start reacting, and then you'll want to start commenting. Okay, and then you'll find that you're using the same amount of time, but you're able to see good content, react to it, and put in a couple of good comments, which is giving you visibility, which is giving you ideas of, hey, this is what I would have said had I shared this article, or that's interesting. It gives me an idea. And then you think of something, you put that in writing, you share it out there, you sort of demystify the whole thing. And next thing you know, you've built a habit, and you're doing way more than you initially thought with the time that you've decided to allocate to it. Now, I tell them often, and I tell the trainers that do these social media training, being active on social networks is like tending a garden. Depending on the amount of time you have, the garden will be of a different size. I might only have just a few minutes a week, and so my garden will be very small, just a couple of veggies. I want to make sure that they're in good shape, they're watered, fertilized, and whatnot. Great. Somebody else might have way more time, and it's important to them because they've got this big event and they want to gain visibility. So they're going to invest in a garden that's much bigger. They're going to invest in more time in building their personal brand, in establishing themselves as thought leaders, as visible experts, making sure that you are able to address all the objections. I don't mind. It's the ghosting that's the danger. That's
Okay.
the really more dangerous aspect of it. It's if an employee has objections, then at least you're having a conversation and you can address those one at a time, one objection at a time. You can have that conversation. It's when they just don't show up, don't and completely disappear and aren't willing to invest a bit of time. That's where you've lost them. But then you move on to those that are interested. Always start with the lowest hanging fruits. Always start your pilots with employees that are interested, excited. They've been doing it. They want to do more. They've seen the benefits, or they've had this one post at one time that went quote unquote viral, and it got them a bunch of opportunities. It might gotten them a project, a discussion, whatnot, and they want to be able to replicate that. You start with those. You start with those people, and you'll have those at you know every level of the organization, from young professionals, mid management to senior management. You bring them into your program the minute that you recognize them.
Do you find them? Is it by looking on LinkedIn to see who's posting, or are you asking around the managers of different teams? I mean, how have you managed to find those kind of people in the past?
I'd rather it be, or I would recommend that you start with the former. That is, start identifying those that you see active on social networks. So again, whether that social network is LinkedIn or Twitter or Threads or Mastodon and Blue Sky, whatever it is, go and see who's actively posting. On LinkedIn, there's this great feature. Once an employee has tagged themselves under an employer in your company page, you'll be able to see which employees that are actively posting. You're going to be able to see them in your activity. And so start jotting those names down and putting a list together. Those are probably your warmest leads, warmest potential employees that would have interest in the NEA program. Your second idea of reaching out to team leaders or comms team to put together a list of people that they would like to see, I see that more as a wish list. You're going to have a bunch of people in there that we would love if Lucy, the VP or the EVP, becomes a bit more active. She would be fantastic. Or Bob here, he leads a great team. He used to be active. He doesn't even have a LinkedIn profile, but if he got started and became more active, that would be fantastic, and that would help all the employees within his or her division be more active. A lot of that is wishful thinking, and I'm not saying that they don't exist. And when they do, that's great because you can take those, nurture those, and maybe invest a little bit of more of your time. Maybe do one-on-ones where you're helping them whenever they're doing their post. You take that 5-10 minutes of during their week and or during their month to coach them in doing it, to do the tagging, do the hashtagging. They're going to get lots of visibility. And then you basically go out to all their peers and you go, hey, Jennifer here is getting some great traction with her posting. If you're ever interested in doing what she's doing, we're here to help. Reach out, let us know. And that sort of ego of trying to outdo their peers sometimes plays in your favor. I do remember that the platform that we had at WSP had a leaderboard, and funny enough, one of the first things that they focused on when we did the training and then later on was I need to beat so and so because he's number one or she's, she's the on top of the leaderboard, and I need to outdo her and get more points and beat her this month.
That's interesting. I've had a similar experience. The points become very, very important, don't they? It's
It
quite interesting.
works.
Yeah, it really does, doesn't it? So I understand that obviously that you would want the low hanging fruit, the people who are active in some way. But I'm guessing if some of those people are not, they're not going to be necessarily that influential. We're not talking about people who are, big influencers or big thought leaders on, say, LinkedIn, for example. Are there other objections or fears that come up from people who are they're kind of interested? They'd like to do it, but they don't do it. So it's more about
Hmm.
that really, or they're not doing it very much. What what
Yeah.
what,
So
what do you
time,
hear?
time was one of them. The other is, for some of these sort of first objections or first answers that you get of why they don't want to partake, is time. The others are, I don't know what to say. What
Mm.
what do I share? So that's sort of easily done. What things, what are the things that are of interest? What's the big topic right now within your sphere of expertise? What comes up in the news these days within your field of practice? So in terms of the content, we're sort of able to get that. The other one is, I don't want to say something that sounds stupid or that is inappropriate, and I'd rather not do anything than do this one thing that comes out all wrong and gets me into trouble. So that's where the training comes in. That's where the social media policy, if you're in doubt, go back to the social media policy, look at, these are the recommendations, the do's and don'ts. Does that, whatever you're seeing, does that transgress one of those guidelines? No, then you're fine. So those are the sorts of objections in terms of the users. Those are the main ones I would see. Nothing else comes up right now.
People talk about things like imposter syndrome. Does that come up at all? Where people go on there and see, you know, their peers, not necessarily within the company, but in the industry. I've sort of heard this from some people where they go on there and everyone that they start following who's got some level of influence seems to know each other and they're all kind of talking and getting lots of engagement and so on. And when they share their
Hmm.
first post, nothing much happens, you know. So it's
I mean, it's funny. I was looking at years and years ago, and really, literally decades ago, when I started a blog as a hobby for something that I was doing, a game that I was doing, and I took a look at the stats that the website, the blog had. In the first 3 years, I'm writing to myself. I
oh, really
was, I mean, I was basically no comments, no interaction, barely any visitors, 30 page views during the month. And that was probably myself just loading the blog and checking out typos and whatnot. And then by the end of the third year, it starts to go up. And within the next 2 years, it went from just a few hundred visits a month to 30, 20, 30, 40,000 page views
wow,
a
wow.
month. Yeah. So it's the same thing, or it's a similar situation with your activity when you start posting. When you start posting for the first time, if you've never done it, you're probably going to not get a lot of reactions, get even less comments. And yes, you're going to get some visibility and some impressions, but it'll feel as though you're at an event, you're speaking in front of a room that's completely empty. It's going to feel like that. And then, one individual is going to show up, and another and another. And they're going to start asking questions and commenting and whatnot. And you're going to get more impressions and a bit and a bit and a bit. And then somebody that has, 10,000, 20,000 followers shows up, interacts with your post, and boom, you get dozens of reactions, a bunch of comments, um, and then you do that again, and then you do that again. I would rather people see a slow but steady progression in how often they post, the number of comments and reactions they get, a slow increase in the impressions, rather than They do 2, 3 posts, and boom, one goes viral, and then it crashes down, and they can't get the same results for the next post and the next post, and they quickly get completely discouraged, and they stop doing it. We're in this for or anyways, I tell people that when you're doing this, you're doing this for the long run. This isn't a finite game. This is something that you're going to do probably for years, especially if you're starting off and you're early in your career. You're going to do that for quite some time. So don't look at it, oh, by the end of the month or by the end of the year, I need to have X number of followers and get this amount of impressions per year and whatnot. Think of it in numbers of the next post and the next post, and how can you improve, and what do you want to do, and experiment and have fun doing it, and that's how you're going to get into the momentum.
So, if looking on a practical terms, if you're in charge of a program or in charge of launching a program, as a manager of that, what's probably the most important thing they could do to help make this change happen within their organization, to help overcome some of these fears or concerns when they're starting out?
Uh, I think that it's important to put on your sort of salesman hat and to sell the idea, to spread the idea of doing that when you're really at the very beginning. You don't have a program, you know about EA, and you'd like to do something like that internally. Start exploring within your organization who has heard of that, who's active. Are there leaders that are active out there that you're seeing publishing content on LinkedIn and other social networks? And then strike, basically plant the seed of, what if we did a pilot? We could start very small. We've just published our social media policy so that our employees know what to do and what not to do on social. We need to grow this. And then soon you'll identify a couple of leaders that have had an interest, would have liked to be able to do that, but they didn't have either the time, the knowledge, or the expertise, and boom, you're there. So you sort of put that together, maybe put a business plan together. Here's what we want to do for the first year. We're looking to bring in 20 ambassadors, 100 ambassadors. We're going to bring them from this specific group or from across the organization. We're going to look to do X, Y, and Z. And we're hoping that by the end of the program or by the end of the year of the pilot, we will have had this many impressions, this many reach, this many reactions, and whatnot. And so put that together, shop that around to within your organization, and you'll eventually find a leader that is willing to invest and believes and understands the value of a well-run, happy EA program.
I like that. So it's quite an internal facing exercise, isn't it? And
At
I was
first, yes.
you know, to build these relationships and find these people and draw out these stories and connections and so on, isn't it? You really got to sort of understand in that role to reach into the organization, haven't you, really, to do that?
Absolutely. And in and of itself, that's a great opportunity to build a strong network within your organization. You'll be the individual that knows so and so in sales and so in marketing and talent and HR and whatnot, even within the actual spheres of expertise of whatever your organization is doing, selling, and offering. You'll reach out to within the leaders within each of these or some of these groups. One thing that I didn't mention that works well is if you're able to find your competitors and identify that they seem to have either be running a program, because you can see by the URL and the post of some of the individuals,
Mm.
or you can see that their equivalent, whomever you're presenting the idea of a pilot to, that individual who's not active on LinkedIn, you can turn around and say, did you know that this individual at our competitor, he just started posting last month, and look, he's got 3 posts and they have hundreds of reactions, and he's visible, he's talking to our clients. Did you know that? You're not doing anything. Are you comfortable knowing that he's talking to some of our clients? That usually gets their attention, and then they go, ooh, okay, we need to get on board, we need to get on this train. We need to have these conversations with our clients, with our competitors' clients and prospects and whatnot. So that's one strategy that has worked well in the past. If they're comfortable with our clients, our potential clients, engaging in conversations with our competitors while we're completely out of the room. If you're comfortable with that, fine. Let's not do an EA program. You will probably not be, and so now I've got your attention.
That's brilliant. It's that competitive thing again, isn't it? We talked about a minute ago, but it's
Absolutely.
on a bigger scale, really. And you're absolutely right. If you ask that question, are you comfortable with them having a conversation and you're not part of it? You can already predict the answer, can't you?
Yeah.
That makes huge sense there. So finally on this, do you think things are changing in this space? Do you think 2024 is going to be the year employee advocacy is going to go mainstream? I mean, Ogilvy released that report earlier this year where they had employee advocacy as the number one prediction in the influencer marketing space. Do you think that's going to come true? Do you think something's going to happen this year that's going to make it reach that tipping point and go more mainstream?
Will it go? To be honest, I don't think it's something that's going to be as easy as now. This is the year that everybody's going to be doing EA. I don't think that that happens like that because of the nature of what EA is. It's change management, it's changing the habit of individuals. It is not a set it and forget it. We now have this cybersecurity server. It filters everything. We just turn the switch on and everything gets done. We don't need to do anything. That's not EA. EA is people. It's people management. It's relationship. It's networking. It's the nature of what EA is. And so it requires time and effort. It requires champions. And if the one champion that's managing the program isn't able to replicate him or herself in finding other champions to push this forward, it's going to be difficult. Having said that, I think that we're getting to a stage where, and either it's my feed, which is on LinkedIn, which is very, I'm sort of an echo chamber. Then again, I'm connected to enough people that there's a variety of content, but I am seeing more and more posts about EA and its success and so forth. So I think there's a buildup of momentum. Will 2024 be the year? I've heard that story before. I've heard that story with EA, and I've heard it with 3D TVs, and I've heard it with, a Vision Pro, and I've heard it with like 3D glasses and whatnot. And
Mm,
yeah, I'll be convinced once we see every organization doing it. But I do think there's an opportunity right now because there's a lot of noise around it. There's a lot of noise around influencer marketing. There's a lot of realization that unless huge amounts of capital is invested in paid marketing, posts aren't being seen. You can have a million followers on your LinkedIn page, you can have a billion followers on your Facebook page. A very minute portion of them will actually see your post, but through your employees, they'll have 10 times the visibility, 8 times the engagement, and people prefer interacting with other people rather than with logos. And one thing that I'd like to add to that is I've often been surprised by people who've come up to me, who've messaged me to say, hey, this post that you did was fantastic. Really, it hit a nerve. It really touched me, or it was super insightful. And then I go, wait a minute, I don't recall seeing them in the reactions or seeing them in the comments. And I go back and they're not.
yeah.
So that one metric, impressions, people will say, it's a vanity metric. It might be, but it has a lot of weight because it has a lot of potential. So I'm hopeful for 2024. I'm hopeful for what AI can do to sort of
Mm.
help the program managers, help. I wrote about that a few weeks ago or last week or
I was just
something.
going to ask you about that actually. Yeah, that was a great article. Yeah, do tell us what your
Yeah.
thoughts.
So I do think that in terms of helping manage the users, the reminders, the inactive users, the ones that are doing well, if AI can kick into that and with some guidance by the program manager help in those tasks, diminish that sort of workload for the content creators or the content adders to the platform, those that find the right content, those that manage the users, fantastic. And sometimes even to the point of helping out some of those SMEs and your experts and your employees. They have a couple of thoughts, but they're very technical. They can write a report, but writing a catchy, insightful, interesting post is not their forte. While maybe AI can help there. I'm not
Yeah,
saying write the whole thing for them. What I'm
sure. Yeah.
saying is, as an assistant, as an editor, basically, they write their thoughts, the AI comes in and, makes that look good, read well, and they're happy with it. They tweak it and then they push it off. If that can help them be more active and it can help more of these individuals be more active, then I think that is where AI can definitely help in making EA more prominent.
I think you're absolutely right, isn't it? I think that's where it can help, kind of making it a bit easier all around and reducing that workload. Because as you say, there are so many moving parts. I suppose there's so many elements to EA, and there's so many different people and their skills and their managers and all these different things happening. So anything that can simplify it, ease it, make it slightly quicker, but at the same
Absolutely.
time while still
Absolutely.
keeping that human side to it, I think.
Yeah, one of the biggest time-consuming aspect of running an EA program is making sure that your employees, the users, are logging in, that they're publishing through it. So this was something that I used to have meetings with the region managers within the organization that were running their EA program through the platform that we had, making sure that they were following up with the users, why they weren't being active. Were they disconnected from LinkedIn, or were they at lost, or was it a content question? All of that sort of administration, if those tasks can be given to an AI who starts to understand and sends out a list to say, hey, these are the top posters, these are the ones that got the most interactions, or we've noticed that you published a post 2 weeks ago that did really well, but you haven't logged in the last 2 weeks. Is there anything that if that can be done by an AI, fantastic, very helpful.
Yeah, that I can see that making a huge, huge difference. Well, thank you so much for your time today, David. That's been, as ever, it's been incredibly insightful. I always learn something new, so it's been really great to hear your experience and your insight on this. I
Thank
know
you for
you.
having me. It
No,
was a
thank
pleasure.
you. And I know you're busy, so appreciate your time with that as well. So finally, where can people find you, and is there anything else we can do to help?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn and on most social networks as Social Dave. So at Social Dave is the username that I use everywhere, even on LinkedIn. So please reach out, connect with me, follow me. Let's interact with my content, your content. It'll be a pleasure. Always happy.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, thank you again, David, and good luck with the next steps and what you're doing. And look forward to speaking again soon.
Likewise, au revoir.